Hey, I'm super. It's October, and I do a lot of spooky and horror stuff all year round, just in general. But this is considered to be the beginning of the spooky season for most people. So I decided to do some videos about the explosion of horror franchises that started in the late 70s and early 80s. And the real landmark beginning of that is 1978's Halloween. I've seen this movie many, many times, and I still love it every time I see it. In comparison to a lot of the sequels, Halloween is very minimalist and simple in its approach, and that ends up making it really the scariest and most effective of any version of the series by far. And when I say version of the series, it's because there are three different alternate timelines as this series progresses, and one complete remake series. So there's going to be spoilers throughout this for the entire series. If you haven't seen these movies and you like surprises, I don't suggest watching this. But otherwise, let's get into it. Halloween starts with a flashback POV shot, which culminates in the murder of a teenager and turns out to have been us seeing through the eyes of a 6-year-old boy named Michael Myers. And one thing about Halloween that once I noticed it on repeat viewings, I can't not see it every time I'm watching, and it's just a minor slight error in execution of this scene, is that the POV shots of this opening scene are clearly through the eyes of an adult-sized person and not a small 6-year-old boy. That said, it's a very effective opening, and it's an interesting tactic that puts you inside the mind of the killer to start with, before giving us a reveal that this brutal killing was done by a child in a clown costume. Seeing through the eyes of the killer is a thing that's been done a lot since then in the genre, especially in other parts of this series, but this was one of the first and I think still the best. The rest of the film is about Michael escaping from the sanitarium he's been in for the last 15 years and going back to his hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois to continue killing. While his physician for this entire time, Dr. Loomis, played by veteran actor Donald Pleasance, tries to track down this killer, Michael eventually runs across Laurie Strode, who's played by Jamie Lee Curtis at the very beginning of her career, and starts stalking her and eventually killing her friends and going after her. One note here that I just want to make, Michael is referred to in the credits and in the original script for Halloween as The Shape. And I mention that because I'm going to end up interchangeably using that with Michael Myers throughout this video, and I don't want anyone to be confused because they don't realize that he's also called The Shape. Whatever. Michael kills a dog in this movie, and it's not the last time he's going to kill an innocent dog in this series, and I wanted to mention it because I love dogs, and I hate Michael Myers because he's a dog killer. At the end of this movie, after all this has gone on, Laurie fights him off repeatedly, with the terror of the situation getting worse and worse each time she thinks it's finally over, and it's not. Eventually, Loomis comes across the house, and as Michael is distracted by Laurie having pulled his mask partially off, the doctor unloads his revolver into the Shape, causing him to tumble out of a window onto the lawn in front of the house. Loomis looks away, and when he looks back, Michael's body is gone. Apparently, the look Loomis gives when he sees this, as if he's very much not surprised by this turn of events, was a suggestion that Donald Pleasance made on set, and they filmed it both ways, and then afterwards, when they were editing, Carpenter was like, no, this works better, so they left that in. I think it makes the scene way better than if he had initially what the direction was for him to look in shock and confusion, and the fact that he looks down there and is like unsurprised. He already knows that this is a possible thing. It just works so much better. After that, we see a series of shots of places that Myers has been throughout the movie, while you just hear his heavy breathing going on. And then the film goes to credits. What I really love about this ending is that nothing in this first film suggests that Myers is anything but a normal human. He appears to be able to be wounded and be hurt by things. And then in those last few moments, it gives you a suggestion that increases the horror by volumes. The Shape may not be able to be killed. The Shape could be anywhere. The Shape could be behind you in the dark. It gives no solid explanation of what's happened. It leaves all of that to your imagination, and it's brilliant. So the iconic mask that Myers wears throughout this entire series, starting here, is from a mold of William Shatner's face. And they used that for a 1975 film called The Devil's Reign. They just took this mask of William Shatner's face. They repainted the mask this stark, ghastly white for this movie. It's become an icon. Halloween was written by John Carpenter, who also directed, as well as with Deborah Hill, who worked with Carpenter on several films before producing a lot of films on her own. And it was a pretty massive success. In fact, for over a decade after this movie, Halloween was considered the most successful independent film of all time. It cost about $300,000 to make, and the amount of money that it made at the box office was over $60 million, which is a pretty good multiplier for the amount of money you spend on an investment like that. So the executive producer, a man named Mustafa Akkad, wanted to make more of these. He was like, wow, I made a lot of money on this. This is lucrative. Let's do this. And so he asked Carpenter and Hill to write a sequel, Halloween 2, which was put out in 1981. The second movie starts out with footage of the end of the original, recapping that Michael should be dead, but isn't. And then it goes to credits and features a similar close-up of a jack-o'-lantern as the first film's credits, except this one opens up to reveal a skull underneath. It's interesting because it serves as an unintentional metaphor for how the series, starting here, loses a lot of the atmosphere in favor of more obvious gore. John Carpenter didn't want to direct this, so it was handed off to a first-time director named Rick Rosenthal. When Carpenter and Hill have talked about writing this afterwards, you get the impression they really didn't want to make it at all. But since the producer was going to do it, they figured they might as well be the ones writing it. Carpenter said that he was drinking a lot when he was writing this, and he very specifically leaned on gore and weird kills more than in the original movie because, while Halloween is very understated for most of the runtime and not very gory, it only took a few years after that for the horror genre, and especially slasher films, to head towards a lot less creeping dread and more overt violence. So he felt that he needed to head that way just to compete in the 1981 horror marketplace. And he was probably right. I think very few filmmakers of the era understood horror the way that Carpenter did. I don't think this is his best work, Halloween 2, but I think he knew that, and it's part of why he didn't want to direct it. Even then, the violence in this movie, like, in view of now, is pretty tame. Some of the kills don't seem to make much sense in places. Like, The Shape has up to this point done a lot of stabbing and strangling, basically. But here he kills two people in succession by stabbing them in the eye with a needle. And also, like, would that kill you instantly like the movie portrays? Because I'm not a doctor, but... So this movie in the first 10 minutes shows you footage of Halloween as part of the recap and Night of the Living Dead on someone's TV. And those are two movies that I'd much rather be watching than watching Halloween 2. Like, you know, don't get me wrong, this movie does have some good moments, but those two are classics that I could watch again and again and again, and have done so. The series as a whole almost always has some kind of scene of people watching another horror movie, which is kind of a nice touch that goes back to the original, where they're watching The Thing from Another World, which John Carpenter would later go on to remake as The Thing, which is a great remake. But sometimes in watching some of these where they're showing some other movie on TV, you're like, I could be watching something better. There's a scene early on in Halloween 2 where there's a woman who looks about 20. She hears screaming next door. So she walks outside to call out to her neighbor, hears no response, and then goes back inside to continue a phone conversation with a friend, in which she says, oh, it was just my neighbors. They're always fighting. It's probably just the husband beating his wife. Anyway, back to our conversation. And then, like, 30 seconds later, she gets murdered, and probably shouldn't have been so blasé about domestic violence. The first shot in Halloween 2 that isn't just a recycled footage from the first movie, she's wearing a very obvious wig. It's funny to me because during my some research I was doing on all of these and looking at interviews that different people involved had done, the director, Rick Rosenthal, said that the wig was great and you totally couldn't tell the difference between it and her real hair from the other movie. And he's wrong. It looks better in a lot of the movie, but In that initial scene where they're like rolling her from the house into the ambulance on a stretcher, every time I'm watching it, I sit there and look at it and think, I can barely recognize that the person wearing that wig is Jamie Lee Curtis, because the wig is so bad that it almost looks like it's a fake body to me. But later on, yeah, it does look better, but like that shot, it's kind of awful. Also, at the beginning of this movie, Dr. Loomis sees what he thinks is Myers walking down the street, just kind of walking down the street. And he tries to shoot him in the middle of the street. But instead, a police car runs the shape over, panics and swerves, pins him to a van, which then explodes and engulfs him in flames. And this would be fine, except that it turns out that that isn't Michael Myers. It's just one of the many other people on Halloween night in 1978 who were wearing the exact same costume as him. Like, because, you know, that extremely popular late 70s Halloween trend, everybody was either a character from Star Wars, Saturday Night Fever, or William Shatner dressed as a mechanic. And by the way, in this scene, this cop runs over a pedestrian, panics and rams into a parked van, and the way that the other cops, this cop, and Dr. Loomis react to the fact that a police officer just did that is very low energy for that situation. There's a knife-wielding killer on the loose, a doctor waving around a loaded gun and yelling to anyone he comes across, "I shot him 6 times!" And this cop runs over a pedestrian and causes an explosion in the street and burns a man to death. And the reaction of everyone there, it's not much more than like, oh man, this is the 3rd time this week, Johnson. This movie is also, I think, the first but not last of the series that someone mispronounces Samhain. They keep calling it Samhain. It's not how you pronounce that. Strangely, they get it right in Halloween 3, and then in other movies they go right back to saying it wrong again. And it's just, you know, do a little bit of research on other languages, guys. Anyway, most of this movie takes place in the hospital where Laurie's been taken for her injuries, and where Myers tracks her to try to finish what he started. This hospital on Halloween night is empty and desolate to a degree that I've never been able to fully suspend my disbelief. The plot doesn't really work if the hospital isn't kind of deserted, but it just feels very odd to anyone who's ever been in a hospital ever. Odd bit of film history connection here, as just an aside. The Shape in the original Halloween was played mostly by a man named Nick Castle. Shortly after he'd made this, he started directing films because that was what he really wanted to do. When he saw Halloween 2, even though he wasn't in this movie, he liked the presence and style of a young actor in it named Lance Guest. And he played Jimmy the paramedic. And he decided to cast him as the lead a few years later when he directed what is now the cult classic sci-fi movie, The Last Starfighter. So the movie that helped kick off the slasher genre also inadvertently spawned that too. Anyway, back to this movie. I do love the way that Myers very slowly Kool-Aid Mans through a glass door at the hospital. It makes me laugh every time I see it. Then he Kool-Aid Mans through a regular door as well. And I know it's supposed to be intimidating and scary, but every time I see it, I just hear, "Oh yeah," in my head. I have never said that I was normal. Carpenter and Hill intended for this to be the end of Michael Myers and Dr. Loomis, which is why the script has Michael getting shot in both eyes and effectively blinded, and then him and Loomis both get blown up and burned to death. Or do they? Spoilers, no, they don't. Though they don't feature at all in the 3rd Halloween movie, subtitled Season of the Witch. The intent here was to turn the franchise into an anthology series with a different villain each time. And the connecting tissue would just be that all the stories are taking place on Halloween. So Season of the Witch has no recurring characters from the first 2 movies. And it also isn't a slasher film at all. It's more in the vein of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where it's this town of people who are all acting kind of creepy and you don't quite know why, etc. And then it turns out people are literally being body snatched. Here's my attempt to try to explain the plot of this movie as best I can. There is a Celtic witch who has come to Southern California from the UK and has stolen part of Stonehenge. I don't know how he exactly was able to secretly transport something that big here without notice, because it's known and on TV that part of Stonehenge is missing. But whatever. He intends to use this part of Stonehenge to obtain power by sacrificing a bunch of children using Halloween masks that he's fitted with a microchip that somehow uses witchcraft to turn them into headless robots with a fake human head attached, or turn them into a pile of bugs and snakes. The movie itself is very hazy on which of those things results from the masks themselves, but it's pretty creepy either way. Or maybe it's doing both of those things. I've honestly never been sure. Like, it really doesn't explain that. It's just like weird stuff happens on the screen. So the movie ends with the bad guy winning and the Earth is doomed. It's definitely like kind of a dark ending, but it's a very campy movie. So also the bad guy in this is the CEO of OCP in RoboCop. And when I was looking things up to see like other stuff he had been in, I noticed that, and had never known before, even though I've seen both of these movies multiple times, that he played Grig, an alien creature in The Last Starfighter a few years after this. And if I find a connection to The Last Starfighter in every movie in this series, I am going to start rethinking my life. So as much as I am kind of like mocking this movie a little bit, I have to say, and this is probably going to be unpopular with extreme Michael Myers fans, but I kind of like it. It's a complete departure from the series, but if you remove it and view it as its own thing, I think it's a perfectly fun bit of 80s sci-fi horror campy nonsense. It's not a great movie, but it's definitely like fun, and there's a commercial jingle in it that keeps popping up throughout the movie that is supposed to activate the Halloween masks that sacrifice children. And it's just, every time I hear that, it's just funny. I don't know. However, audiences really hated it. It was not the box office success the producers were hoping for, because everybody wanted more of the guy in the Shatner mask. But they weren't going to get that for another 6 years while the property just sat unused. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, marked the end of John Carpenter's involvement with the series for decades. And sadly, it was the end of Deborah Hill's involvement for good, because she passed away from colon cancer in 2005. I could do a whole video on her career and the impact, but that's a different video from this. She'll definitely be missed. Also, she was a producer on the 1985 board game-based movie Clue. I had no real way to work that info into this, but I want you to know it because I think that Clue is still a really fun movie. Mustafa Akkad wanted to continue the story on from the end of part 2. Hill and Carpenter did not want to continue with the shape as a concept at all, so they sold their rights to the series to him, and then the series just continued on without them. So Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, takes place exactly 10 years after the original, and starts with explaining that Myers and Loomis were almost killed in that massive explosion, but survived. And Michael is supposedly in a coma and still has fresh bandages on his face from the burns, which probably wouldn't be the case 10 years after the fact, but you don't show the masked killer's face in the movie. At least you don't in the first 5 minutes of the movie. There are rules here, people. Also, I'm just going to state that some of these later movies I saw, or at least saw parts of, but there's some of them I didn't watch all the way through clearly when I was like doing a rewatch here and going, I don't remember this at all. And apparently I never saw the 6th movie until I was watching it for this video. And I didn't realize that I'd never watched it. Just when I'm watching it, and the whole way I'm going, this does not ring a bell on any level. So anyway, that's just a thing. In this movie, part 4, he's apparently been playing possum for a decade. And as soon as he hears, while they're in the ambulance transporting him from one place to another, that he has a living niece which they mention in conversation to each other, he immediately wakes up and murders the entire ambulance full of people and runs off back to Haddonfield. Most of the movie after this point revolves around the niece, Jamie, and Michael's attempts to murder her, because he takes the whole family annihilator pathology to a different level, apparently. We're introduced to her with dialogue about her parents being dead, and she's under foster care. One of the just weird things here, she's trying to get comfort from her foster sister when they're first introducing her character. And she just wants to be told that she's loved and part of the family. And the first thing that this older sister, foster sister, says to her is, well, you're not my real sister. And that's not off to a great start on that kind of conversation. Like, she's clearly trying, but like, that's just a very poor choice of words to give to try to comfort a child who is, I don't know, 7 or so. But the entire foster family is pretty awful. Jamie does have this adorable dog in this movie, which Myers murders because of course he does, because he's terrible. Dr. Loomis survived the explosion with some scars on his face and body, and he walks with a cane now. He's also switched from carrying a 6-shot revolver to a semi-automatic pistol with an 8-round magazine. Not that bullets seem to do much to the shape in the first place. Like, the last time we saw him, he was shot in both eyes and blinded, but his eyes grew back.
I got better.
Then it goes to Jamie at school, in an elementary school, and the other kids are in the hallway taunting her and chanting, "Jamie's an orphan," in the hallway. And honestly, this checks out with my experience in elementary school, because children are assholes. After Michael escapes and he comes back to Haddonfield, he randomly finds another William Shatner mask like the one he had before, in a costume area in a drugstore. And later on, there's a scene where these 3 teenagers have the same exact masks so that they can pull a hilarious prank on the police where they almost get shot. Because 10 years later, Haddonfield, Illinois still loves ghostly white William Shatner masks from an obscure 1975 horror movie. Anyway, the Shape does more murders, including this time an entire police station, and eventually he gets shot at the end by several people with shotguns and falls down a mine shaft. And then everybody's back home. We're at the ending. Dr. Loomis says it's over. Michael is in hell where he belongs. And honestly, Doctor, what are you basing that on? Because he's already proven immune to bullets. How do you think more bullets is actually going to do the trick at this point? And you think the movie is like over, about to roll credits, but nope. Instead, Jamie's upstairs. She puts on a Halloween mask, just like like a domino mask kind of thing, you know, just over the eyes. It goes to a similar POV shot as the opening of the original film, where she grabs a pair of scissors and stabs her foster mom in the bathtub. And the movie ends with Jamie at the top of the stairs holding these scissors, looking just dead-eyed and cold and covered in blood. And Loomis is sitting there at the bottom of the stairs screaming, "No, no!" And everyone's horrified. So most of this movie is pretty standard slasher material. It's nothing special. And most of these movies have this very specific framework that just follows the original, trying to recapture it and never quite doing it. You know, Michael escapes captivity, stalks his target for about the first hour and 10 minutes, occasionally killing a few people along the way, and then in the final 20 minutes isolates his target inside a building usually. They barely fight him off multiple times, and then he gets taken down in some way. That would be the end, logically, except that the producer forbids it because we want sequels.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula.
But I have to say that for this one, I do actually love this ending. It's really awful in kind of the best way, and it makes you wonder what's coming next. Unfortunately, what was next was Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. And I want to give a quick note here. As I was queuing up this movie to rewatch it on streaming, the description on screen starts with the following words, direct quote here: "Following her mysterious behavior at the conclusion of Halloween 4, Mysterious behavior, is that what we're calling it now when you go upstairs and stab your foster mother in the bathtub with a pair of scissors? Oh, okay. That's, I don't think, yeah. Anyway, so Revenge of Michael Myers. The foster mom isn't dead. In case you cared, you probably don't. I'm not sure I even recall that she has a first name in part 4, but she's not dead. However, her and the father don't actually appear in this movie at all at any point, so it doesn't really matter anyway. However, Jamie has been institutionalized, as one does with a 7-year-old who stabs her foster mom with a pair of scissors, and she's under the care of Dr. Loomis now. And speaking of Dr. Loomis, despite what he said in the last movie, Michael is not dead and in hell where he belongs. Instead, he manages to crawl out of that mine shaft into a stream, floats down the stream, and ends up trying to strangle an old man living in a shack down by the river before passing out. And then it goes to 1 year later. They quickly establish in the movie that Jamie now has some kind of psychic leak to Michael, and she's also mentally scarred from the entire experience of the previous film, which is pretty fair. Michael wakes up and immediately kills the old man who had been nursing him to health for the past year because he has no gratitude at all. Jamie can't talk now due to the traumas that she's experienced. Like, she can, but she's like unable to make words, sounds. Also, there's another dog involved in this movie who Michael eventually kills because Michael Myers is absolutely the fucking worst. There's a scene where the police show up to investigate a thing, and there's this very weird music cue in the scene that's like this womp, 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 womp. And there's like a squeaky toy noise that's accompanying it. And it's just a very strange choice because it's just so overtly comical in a movie that isn't comical, like, at all. And again, in this movie, there's someone that pulls a prank of dressing up as Myers that also almost gets them shot by the police. And I genuinely do not know why people keep doing this and where they're getting all these masks from. You know, it would be hilarious if I dressed up as a known serial murderer from this town who killed an entire police station full of cops last year, and we pretended I was about to murder you in front of a squad car. I do have to give them credit in this movie for very specifically showing that a couple that's about to have sex is going to use protection when they're having sex in this random barn that they're in. It's a real step forward in demonstrating safe sex, even though they do both get murdered with farm tools in the same scene. During another scene, a bit past this in the film, Michael's in a car running over what appears to be Christmas tree farms while chasing his target, and it's just like this, up yours, other holidays. After more struggles, Michael ends up in jail at the end after being shot with multiple tranq darts and beaten in the head by Loomis with a 2x4. Loomis appears to be dead again here. Like, it looks like he's just had a heart attack and just died, collapsed after he beat Michael Myers. But, spoiler, he's not dead, though the next movie is his last because it was one of Pleasance's last movies before he passed away in real life. So there's a mysterious stranger that keeps showing up every few scenes. You don't see his face, you just see that he has a tattoo that's the same as a weird symbol that is on Michael Myers' wrist as well. So there's some kind of connection there, and we're trying to figure out what it is. It never gets paid off in the movie at all. It just is a thing that's left unresolved. And then in the last few minutes of the movie, there's a massive shootout at the police station, but the shootout is all off screen. We still never see what exactly happened there, but we do know by the end of it that Michael has escaped, and then the credits roll. Also, the idea from the beginning of the movie of Jamie having this psychic link to Michael could have been really interesting, but it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't really pay off, and by the next movie it's pretty much forgotten and not really addressed. So that was a little disappointing. I thought, oh, they're trying to do something here, but they never actually did it. And for 7 years after this movie, even though there is a very definite cliffhanger at the end. Nothing happened as far as any sequels to the series, just they didn't do anything there for 7 years. When they finally did, it was a movie called The Curse of Michael Myers, which, as I said before, I apparently just never bothered seeing until now and didn't even realize it. Because honestly, the chronology of all these stories and like where they go is so muddled and confusing in places that it's easy to miss a movie and not feel like you actually missed anything. By the way, Paul Rudd is in The Curse of Michael Myers. It was, I think, his first starring role in a movie. It was being put out right about the same time as Clueless, but there he was kind of like a secondary character. Here he's one of the stars, and he is he's playing a adult version of Tommy Doyle, who was a little boy that's in the first movie, but he's grown up now. He's obsessed with Michael Myers and kind of weird and creepy. This movie tries to pay off some of the last movie's stuff with the shadowy figure and the wrist tattoo and all of that, but suffice to say, what it is there's a weird druid cult that puts the curse of Thorn on Michael Myers as a child, compelling him to kill and making him immortal. And they have apparently, the cult apparently has kidnapped Jamie at some point between films, and now she has a baby and she is running for her life from the cult. But then 15 minutes in the movie, she is dead. And yeah. Also, this movie is full of a lot of weird flash cuts, so that you know it's from the 1990s, I guess. So Jamie had hid her baby in a bus station bathroom before she was killed, and Paul Rudd ends up finding that the next day. Michael is looking for the baby. These druid cultists are looking for the baby. But Michael also wants to kill the Strode family, who were relatives of Laurie's adopted family. They now live in the old Myers house, which I don't think I'd do if I were the Strode family. Most of the family in the movie claims they didn't know that that was where they were living. And that seems very odd to me and a little bit of a stretch, because everyone in Haddonfield knows about Michael and his sister and every other detail about the case. It essentially made their town famous in the worst way possible. I don't think there's any way that they didn't know that Laurie was adopted into their family, or that this was the creepy Myers house, because there's no way. There's just no way. But all right, fine. The gore level in this movie is kind of ridiculous and comical. There's other more gory stuff in later movies, but somehow the way that a lot of the gore is done here is just, it is laughable, and it's not supposed to be. Also, all of the movies after the first one keep trying slightly different things with the theme music. And it's mostly unsuccessful because the original score is basically perfect as is. But this movie kind of takes it to this whole new level of bad, and it has it's added in loud screaming guitars and stuff because it's 90s edgy, and it's just out of place and unintentionally comical. This movie went through edits a lot after there was a disastrous test screening that people hated, and it really shows that they went through all of these edits to try to fix this disaster. Because this movie really is an incomprehensible mess. The ending is a particularly odd choice, and apparently there's an alternate original ending that is equally bizarre that's out there, but none of it really matters because 2 years later they retconned everything after Halloween 2, said forget any of this shit happened because we're going to say that it didn't, and they put out another movie called Halloween H2O. So in Halloween H2O, Laurie Strode is still alive, and she's been hiding under an assumed name for 20 years and is now running a private school in California. There's no daughter Jamie, there's no Celtic death cult. Loomis is very definitively dead, though the movie says he survived the explosion at the end of part 2, but died a few years ago in this film's timeline. The original script for H2O was done by Kevin Williamson. He's best known for the Scream films. And that kind of makes sense because it's the same production company under Dimension Films, and it's very obvious from Scream that Williamson is a big fan of the original Halloween. He's not credited as a writer, but he did a lot of work on this movie. This is the first movie since Part 2 that had Jamie Lee Curtis in it. It also features her mother, Janet Leigh, which is a nice touch because she was one of the original Scream Queens in Psycho. This is the first and only Michael Myers movie to mostly not take place in Haddonfield. Laurie had wisely moved all the way to California now in this timeline, which seems like a smart move, to be honest. When there's a seemingly invincible serial killer stalking you, you don't stay in the same city and live in the same house. You cut your hair, you fake your death, you change your name, and you leave the state. By this new timeline, the Shape has also not been on a killing rampage every few years since '78. He's been quiet, seemingly gone. He just vanished. Laurie's still living with the ghost of him, though, and not coping well, demonstrated by the fact that she's become a severe alcoholic. At least some of this movie is sort of about how people deal with or don't deal with trauma, which is a much more cerebral and emotional through line than every movie that's come between the original and this one. I do like this movie a lot more than most of the other sequels. It has some of the hallmarks of late 90s horror that a lot of more old school horror fans tend to hate on. But it also tries to bring this series back to its roots and really treat the material more seriously, which I really appreciate. The harrowing trauma that Laurie experiences isn't the kind of thing that just goes away, even if the circumstance does. And I think that it shows that pretty well. There's not really much to snark on in this movie as a result of this treatment of the material. And as much fun, honestly, as I have on snarking on bad horror movies, because that's sort of like a national pastime, I still would rather we had a Halloween series with good sequels across the board. But anyway, Michael does find her here, track her down, and start with the killing again. This film doesn't make any attempt to explain where Michael's been for 20 years, how he managed to not burn to death, why he isn't blind from being shot in both eyes, etc. But after sitting through Curse of Michael Myers, trying clumsily to specifically explain that and failing, I'm oddly comfortable with no explanation. H2O also ends with about as much finality as you possibly can with this series, with Laurie chopping Michael's head off with a fire axe. And they could have ended the series right there. I think that would have been satisfying. Laurie taking back her power and making sure that that fucker is gone forever. But here's the thing. The series producer, Mustafa Akkad, had this specific requirement for all Halloween movies that Michael can't die so that more movies could be made. So they built into it when they were filming that to explain why Michael could still be alive for another film. And in fact, the prologue for the next movie in which they explain how he's alive was stuff that they filmed like the day after they wrapped shooting on H2O, because they had the same sets and everything, so they just did all of that at once. They had it all planned ahead of time to just already bring him back, even though they really looked like they killed him in the last movie. So then they made a direct sequel to that, which was Halloween Resurrection. And it's explained in there that the guy that Laurie beheaded wasn't actually Michael Myers. She thought it was, but instead, Michael had switched clothes with a paramedic, crushed his windpipe so that he couldn't speak, and then escaped. So now Laurie is in an institution. She's still played by Jamie Lee Curtis, but it's basically a cameo at the beginning, so they explain why Michael isn't dead. Michael kills her in about 10 minutes into the movie so that they can go on to the main plot, in which a group of college students compete on an internet reality show run by Busta Rhymes and Tyra Banks by spending a night in the old Myers house in Haddonfield trying to look for clues as to what made Myers kill. And a lot of the footage in the movie is via cameras worn by the contestants. I don't know how to put this. Fuck this movie. I don't really have anything good to say about anything that happens here. H2O gave Laurie a good send-off and respected the potential of the series, and this just shits all over it and goes, what's popular now? Internet, reality shows, grainy found footage, let's do that. And then it ends with Michael Myers being taken down by Busta Rhymes electrocuting him directly in the dick. And I mean, I say found footage, it's not a real found footage movie, but it's that same style of grainy bullshit, and I've never been a fan of that at all. I hate reality shows to begin with, and it's weird. You'd think that me watching a bunch of reality show contestants get murdered one by one would be fun for me, because I really hate reality competition shows mostly. But apparently you'd be wrong, and I'm as surprised as you are. It's just that this movie is really bad. There's really no point in saying much else about the content of this movie, because it's almost not interesting enough to mock. It's also the end of this timeline, even though they left it very open for a sequel, because the next movie that happened was 5 years later, and it was a full remake of the entire franchise by Rob Zombie. Halloween 2007, the remake that he did, is generally derided, but I kind of like some of it. It's unnecessary, but as far as a more modern remake of that, it's not awful. It spends a lot more time on Michael's childhood and how he became a killer, and then goes to just sort of retreading a lot of the scenes from the 78 movie. And it's not great, but it's made by someone who clearly loved the original and wanted to give it more respect than some of the sequels did. I think the whole he was bullied and had a bad childhood, so now he's a murderer thing is kind of nonsense. I wish they'd stop making prequel backstories like that. I don't care about them. Like, I don't need to know that the Grinch was like picked on as a child and that's why he hates Christmas now. I don't need to know that like the Joker had a really bad life and that's why he's a homicidal clown. I don't care. Fuck you. I don't care. But this movie is kind of well done for a reboot that I don't think we needed in the first place. And it has a lot of actors in it that I really like, so it's kind of like it's a mixed bag, you know? A few years later, he made a sequel to his reboot that was called Halloween 2. I don't really have much to say about Halloween 2 other than I didn't like it. I own a copy of it that I bought. I have no idea where it is, and I almost don't care that I don't know where it is. That's how much I just don't really care about it. I get what he was going for with trying to show how the trauma would affect Laurie, but it just wasn't enjoyable for me, and I just don't want to say much about it beyond that. After the Halloween 2 remake was put out in 2009, there wasn't another Myers movie for 9 years until they put out Halloween in 2018, which was co-produced by Blumhouse, making this the longest gap between any two movies in the entire franchise. It also serves as another alternate timeline, with this one erasing everything but the original film. So Michael isn't Laurie's brother now in this timeline, and I personally prefer that. I think that's pretty clear. I wish they'd given it a different title to differentiate from the original. I mean, it's kind of a minor point, but like, let's watch Halloween and its direct sequel, Halloween. It's confusing. But the movie is pretty good, so I don't really care that much. I forgive that, you know. Halloween 2018 really is probably my favorite of any entry in this series aside from the original. By removing all of the convoluted backstories that never really worked and making this just a sequel to the 78 film, and stripping out the overt supernatural stuff, leaving it all to your imagination. It has a real back-to-basics approach, and it brings back a lot of the underlying tension that the first movie had by having you leave a lot to your imagination as to why that stuff is going on. In this sequel, it's been 40 years since the original incident. Michael was arrested, and he's been locked up ever since. Laurie's become somewhat of a shut-in, who spent all this time preparing for Myers to return. In the process, she's become estranged from her daughter and trying to maintain a relationship with her granddaughter, which is not going great, and is probably suffering from PTSD, you would think. She's set up a safe room in her house and is basically like a doomsday prepper, but she's prepping for a very specific doomsday the night Michael comes home. So Michael gets set off by a couple of podcaster journalists who go to the prison and show him his own mask that he had used in the killings. They're just trying to get a reaction out of him for their podcast. But it flips a switch in his head. So after their visit, he's on a transport bus to another prison. and the bus gets crashed. He escapes. I'm presuming that he caused the crash. And then he heads to Haddonfield. He stalks the podcasters and murders them both. And then he goes after Laurie Strode again because she's the one that got away from him, you know. Except now she's got a plan, a bunch of traps built into her home, and a stockpile of shotguns. There's a plot point where Michael's doctor, who took over after Loomis, murders a cop because he feels like he needs to commit a murder so he can better understand Michael. And I think this is kind of a weird, unnecessary, and odd twist. But within a few minutes of that, he's dead too, and we're back to the main plot, so it doesn't really matter. And while this movie does go back to the basics a lot, it still can't compete with the creepiness of the original. I do think it comes as close as the series ever has to recapturing that. And I really appreciate that, especially after how Resurrection botched everything. And the movie ends with Laurie and her daughter and her granddaughter having trapped Michael in the safe room in the basement of their house, and then setting the entire place on fire. Then the camera shows that Michael has somehow escaped again, and he's still out there, and maybe he's right behind you. And this isn't the end of the series. In about 10 days from now, they're releasing a direct sequel to this made by the same team called Halloween Kills. And they're planning to release an end to this trilogy next October entitled Halloween Ends. They had initially planned on releasing Halloween Kills last year and Halloween Ends this year, but because of the unpleasantness, everything got pushed back. So now it's a year off from that. But I really hope that these live up to the potential of this entry, which I thoroughly enjoy. But I've been hurt before, so please don't mess this up. Now, as a way of ending this, I want to give a quick ranking of these movies as a numbered list from worst to best. So, here we go. Number 11 is Halloween Resurrection. It was hard for me actually deciding which one is the worst, because there are a few of these that are truly not good movies. But this one really takes the prize, because I really, really hate this grainy found footage crap, and I wish it would die. But it just keeps coming back like a guy in a Shatner mask, so I don't know. Number 10 is The Curse of Michael Myers. The entire movie is just an incomprehensible mess. None of it's really enjoyable, aside from seeing very early Paul Rudd, who is honestly better than this and feels out of place. Number 9 is Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. This is where it is on the list because it's just a deeply mediocre movie. It's not as awful as the other two that are behind it on here, but it also doesn't have anything cool enough in it to redeem it from being so deeply dull. And anything that could be interesting in it is set up and never really paid off. And it's just really disappointing. Number 8 on this list is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. It's just a real letdown, because they could have really gone somewhere with it, and where they went with it was just weird, and I didn't like it. In the number 7 spot on here is Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. I still do love the ending of it, but the rest of the movie is pretty forgettable, and also points off to them for not really paying off the potential of that ending in the next movie. I guess that's the other movie's fault, but it feels like there was no plan to any of this. Number 6 is where I'm going to put Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. It's right in the middle of the list because it's not a great movie, but it is kind of fun if you view it as a totally unrelated thing to the rest of the series and don't judge it on this should have been a Myers movie. It's just not that. And it's perfectly enjoyable kind of, goofy 80s sci-fi horror crud, Number 5 here, and this will be the start of where I feel like it's going to be controversial to people, Halloween 2 from 1981. I really, truly think the familial connection between Laurie and Michael was a bad idea to start with. Carpenter agrees with me. He says he never wanted to do that in the first place, but they wanted a twist. A lot of where the other movies have really gone wrong has been in expanding on that bad idea. So it kind of like, it has a lot of points off for having originated something that really demonstrably made the series worse. It does have some cool scenes and atmosphere, and you can tell they really wanted to make it like the original and make it feel like a real continuation, but it ultimately is just another horror sequel that doesn't really live up to the potential. Number 4 is Rob Zombie's Halloween. Again, wasn't necessary to make this movie. But as a tribute to 70s horror, I still kind of enjoyed it, even if it did also go with that bullcrap family connection to Laurie. I know a lot of people won't agree with me placing it here on the list and think that it should be much worse on the list, but I found that you either like Zombie's film style or you don't. And I mostly do, but if you don't, I would skip this and the sequel, because if you don't like his other movies, you will not like this either. I almost didn't even include these in the lineup of this at all, but I'm a completionist this way and I needed to do it, so I did. Number 3 here is Halloween H2O. It places behind the next two because while I like where I was going with Laurie and how that one bad night affected her for such a long time, it's slightly marred by the movie that followed it and erasing a fitting badass ending for Laurie. And the fact that it was intentional that they were going to erase that, I think it just kind of sours the whole thing for me. So then we're at number 2. And we all know, I think at this point, because of what I've already said, it's going to be the 2018 sequel to the original Halloween. I think this is the best of the sequels by far. It gives a similar treatment to Laurie as H2O by having her still trying to deal with what had happened to her. But it gets extra points for divorcing itself completely from that family connection plot line. And because instead of hiding, Laurie is just standing her ground at her house saying, "Come and get me, you Shatner wannabe." But we all know there can only be one number 1, and it has to be the original. The original Halloween still holds up. It's tense and creepy in a way that nothing else is quite managed. And it did it all while having a bare minimum of on-screen gore and violence, really. So much of what's happening is implied or seen in shadow, and it lets your imagination fill in the blanks. And the original score is still absolutely haunting. It's the ringtone on my cell phone, even now. I was once woken up in the middle of the night from a sound sleep in the dark by that theme music because my phone was ringing, and I was seriously scared for half a second before I realized what was happening. My phone stays on silent at night now, just so you know. This video is over. I hope that you liked it. I will be doing some similar reviews of other long-running horror series over the next 4 weeks or so. So if you want to see more of that, you can subscribe to my channel. You can hit the bell to be notified when a new video drops. If you liked this video, there is a button for that too that gives you a little thumbs up. If you didn't like it, I mean, I guess you could press that too, but why? Why would you do that to me? If you want to tell me why I am wrong about where I placed things on the list, or you want to agree with me, or you want to tell me your favorite scene or your favorite kill in the series, there's an entire comments section here for that too. They think of everything here. Anyway, I will see you next time. Thanks for coming to my meltdown.